Hi, my name is Cynthia Bush, and I am from the class of 1997, which I'm going to tell you now, we believe that's the best class that Columbia has ever had. Thank you, 97. It is great to see so many alumni here this weekend. We are going to have an absolutely fabulous time down memory lane. So they asked me to come and share a few words with you about what made Columbia so special for me, and then I'm going to have the pleasure of introducing our session. So I'll start out by saying that I manage approximately $50 billion of assets in timber, agriculture, infrastructure, and private equity. So of course, I'm using the concepts and the things that Columbia is so justifiably famous for every single day. And then also, as you guys know, when you leave here, you know how to think critically, question effectively, and lead decisively. All things that I'm sure all of you continue to do every single day. But really, when I think about it, it's things that are on the qualitative side that continue to resonate with me. And right now, I've got my oldest daughter who's graduating from high school next year. And so I'm basically on a year-long goodbye tour with her. And she's really putting up with that amazingly well, because I'm hugging her every day, kissing her every day, I'm driving her crazy. And my youngest daughter follows 3 years later, and then we're empty nesters. And so I've been thinking about what is it that I'm going to miss the most when the kids go. And really, I think it's the spirited family discussions around just diverse and crazy topics. I mean, we've debated things like the most underrated tennis player, the best way to make paella, which is my favorite dish, and even talked about the merits of the wall. And for the Americans in the room, when we were having that wall discussion, we were talking about President George Washington, who in the 1790s evaluated the cost and effectiveness of building a wall in the Northwest Territories of what became the great state of Ohio so that he can contain the native population. So when you hear about the wall today, just know nothing new under the sun. They were talking about that in the 1790s. But in any case, so when I think about Columbia, and I think about Follies and fun spring break trips and this wonderfully aesthetically challenging but oh so beloved building of Uris Hall, it's really the lifelong friendships that were forged here. It's really the spirited discussions that I had with my classmates and the faculty and the visiting professors. It's the ideals that were articulated and the ideas that were expressed. Those are the things that I really remember and that I'll always cherish. And so really, that's a great segue into our session today, which is Trends in Innovation in Healthcare. I'm sure we're going to have some pretty spirited discussion with our distinguished alumni panel and our moderator. So let me tell you a little bit about Professor Bunny, as I'm going to call her.
I like it.
Yeah. She is from the undergraduate college of Columbia University, and I was just teasing her that she did not go here to business school. She went to the other place, which we won't mention. But she has had a very long and distinguished career, as have our panelists. In the interest of time, they asked me not to read their full bios, but each one of you received them when you checked in today. So please make sure you take a look, because they are extremely impressive. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Professor Bunny, who I forgot to mention, she is head of, Healthcare Management and Pharmaceutical Development Program. Did I get that right?
No.
No. Fix it for me, please.
Thank you. So I do love being called a professor, but I'm not one yet. But you can call me that. So yeah, I'm Bunny Ellerin, and I'm the director of the Healthcare and Pharmaceutical Management Program at Columbia Business School. I started in September, and it's just been really a lot of fun and a joy. And I kind of want to know, how many of you are in the industry? Okay, I'm more. That's good that you are. And that's good, more than I thought. But how many of you are patients? Right, we're all patients. And so whether you're in the industry or not, I think you'll get a lot out of today's discussion because we're going to be talking about a lot of different areas. And I just wanted to kind of set the stage. Healthcare is always in the midst of transition. But today I think it's safe to say it's in a lot of transition. And clearly you all follow the news and what's been going on with the reform debate. But there's a lot of other issues that are going on, influencing the direction of healthcare and innovation and delivery. So the exciting part, some of the trends, number one is how doctors and hospitals get paid, payment models. We're really moving from what's a fee-for-service, pay as you go, the more you do, the more you get system to one that's around value-based outcomes. We're looking at incredible integration of data and analytics into decision-making, much wider scale implementation of technology, finally, and it's often said that healthcare has been very late to that game. Precision medicine, which is really targeted drug delivery and targeted drug development. The whole idea of genomics and the fact that we can sequence genomes for under $1,000 is pretty incredible. And, of course, the pricing that goes along with it. And drug pricing clearly is an issue. And finally, consumer, not you, all of us, our demand for better service and transparency. And the CEO of CityMD, which is an urgent healthcare center here in New York, a chain, actually just sold to Warburg Pincus, he spoke at a panel that I ran, and he said, it's the millennials. They are not going to stand for this healthcare system. They are the ones who are really going to be the drivers of change. And the more and more I see it, the more and more I agree. On the backdrop, though, the things that we grapple with in healthcare, lack of access to care, right? Not everyone has insurance, and even those who do may not really have the kind of insurance that you need to be fully taken care of. We have completely uneven quality of care, depending on area, institution, part of the country, where you live. There's tremendous physician burnout and dissatisfaction. And that's a big one because those doctors are the ones who take care of us and really help us in so many ways. And so that's a problem. Then there's the regulatory hurdles. And certainly within drug development, that can be a big hurdle. But there are regulatory issues throughout. Pricing, as I mentioned before, drug pricing. Pricing that doesn't make sense. It doesn't reflect the value to the patient. And pricing in hospitals, you can't even understand what they're charging you when you look at the charge master. So that's a hard one. And then finally, the entrenched way of doing things, the way we've got these big, giant organizations, and we talk about innovation and progress, and we are making it, we're going to talk about it, but there's also the idea of we still like to do it the old way. So with that, those are some of the key issues and trends. We've got 3 health alumni who are healthcare leaders. I had asked each of them just to talk a little bit, just a little bit about what they're doing, as well as what they're most excited about in healthcare. Then I have a bunch of questions prepared that I want to ask, but I would love for this to be interactive and for you to ask questions, so we know what you really care about. So I'll probably interject with that and ask the audience. So first is Rachel Stahler, who is the CIO of Inventive Health. Next to Rachel is David Epstein, who was executive partner at Flagship Pioneering. Is that right?
I am an executive.
Yes, good. And the former CEO of Novartis Pharmaceuticals. And next to him is Shahram Ebadollahi. Is that close? That's not bad. Who's the VP of Innovation and the Chief Science Officer at IBM Watson Health. So, Rachel, would you kick us off with just a little bit about what you're up to and what you're most excited about?
Sure. Hi. Nice to see you all. Good to be back. 10 years later. Feels like yesterday. So I'm the CIO of Inventive Health. We're a pretty small company, a little over $2 billion in revenue. And we have a clinical division and a commercial division. On the clinical side, we run clinical trials. And on the commercial side, we do everything after that. So Our slogan, our motto is from lab to life. So we are an outsource provider back to pharma. And with a lot of the trends that Bunny just mentioned, there's increasing pressure on pharma to reduce their costs and to look at ways to do things more efficiently. And companies like mine are perfectly situated in the market to be able to kind of capture that demand. As the Chief Information Officer, I run technology for the company across clinical and commercial. And it's a really exciting and challenging and demanding space as we try to figure out, from lab to life, what can technology do? What can we do to enable the pharmaceutical companies to be able to get that drug out to the patients faster, cheaper? Right? So a lot of the trends that you just heard Bonnie talk about are pharma is facing those challenges and trying to figure out how to respond to them. But there's the pharmaceutical side of this discussion, and for me, it's figuring out how do I help my partners, which are the pharmaceutical companies, to respond to these market pressures in a way that, at the end of the day, they can do what it is that they're there to do, which is to make drugs, find innovative drugs, make them, manufacture them, and get them into the hands of patients as quickly as possible. And so I think that there are sometimes misperceptions about pharma that, I have some actual friends that tell me, well, pharma is trying to not cure cancer. That's not true. And, I think that I live and breathe every day quite the opposite. And, what I'm excited about are some things that we'll talk about today around data and analytics and how can we leverage the consumerization of IT, put the power back into the hands of the patients and help to get the drug to the right patients at the right time for the right price.
Thank you.
Great. So I'm glad you confirmed that pharma is trying to find a cancer cure. I spent 9 years of my life starting at Novartis, the oncology business from scratch, and growing it to the #2 oncology company in the world. I did that from our headquarters in New Jersey, and then I moved to Switzerland roughly 7 years ago to become the Chief Executive Officer for the pharma business, which was everything from preclinical development through commercialization globally, 55,000 people and roughly $33 billion in sales. And what I'm most proud about really are two things over the course of time I was at Novartis. One is my teams developed and launched over 30 what we call new chemical entities or new drugs, multiple new indications and new dosage forms. And just as importantly, we had the opportunity to work with terrific people, develop people's careers. 5 of those individuals that worked with me went on to become CEOs of their own companies, other companies. So the ability to coach and give back is an extraordinarily personally rewarding kind of thing. About a year and a half ago, I decided I wanted to try something different. I got to tell you, when you're CEO of an international company for 6 years, it gets a little tiresome to go through the same cycle every quarter over and over again. And you begin to wonder if there's a way you can do the things you like and maybe less of the things that are required to keep a big commercial engine, development commercial engine going. And I came to find out that in certain parts of the world, it's no surprise to you, in San Francisco, in Boston, a little bit here in New York, there are now areas of high intensity of startup companies that are working on truly cutting-edge technologies around the microbiome, different types of cellular therapies, different types of therapies for fibrotic diseases, and I can go replacement body parts. I can go on and on and on. And the idea that I could take the knowledge from the big pharma world and help start those companies up was something that was very intriguing to me. So in January, I joined Flagship in Boston, and I'm now splitting my life. Instead of flying from New York to Switzerland twice a month, I'm flying between Miami. I have Washington in my mind. Miami, New York, and Boston. I go back and forth. And I got to tell you, one of the other privileges of moving from the last role to this role is there's no more jet lag because I'm always in the same time zone.
East Coast all the way.
Exactly.
Shahram?
Back in 2009, 2010, I started health informatics and health analytics research in IBM, what people these days call big data in healthcare and life sciences. And around 2014, and we developed a lot of technologies and capabilities. 2014, I had the privilege of starting to work on this project and strategy that became Watson Health. And we stood up Watson Health actually a week ago, 2 years ago in 2015, April of 2015, and was employee number 1 of that, and now has grown to 7,000 people or more after multiple $1 billion of acquisitions. It is IBM's first industry vertical unit. It's completely focused in healthcare and life sciences. And it aims at, if you look at healthcare and life sciences and what is happening, there is a lot of data that is becoming available. And people are basically drowned in data to make sense of it. Either you're a research scientist in a pharmaceutical company, you're a doctor or a nurse at the point of care, you're that oncologist, you're the geneticist, you're the imaging radiologist, and so on and so forth. How to make sense of all of this data, how to serve different use cases. And what we do in Watson Health is bring cognitive technologies. Other people call it artificial intelligence. We call it cognitive technologies. And we call it cognitive technologies for a reason, because our take of it is on it is augmented intelligence, is not to replace the human operator, whomever that operator and use case could be, but is how to scale that person to do their job better cope with this onslaught of data and knowledge that is being thrown at them. And I highly recommend, there's a book by these 2 professors at MIT, Second Machine Age, and they compared this era that we are in to the Industrial Revolution, where when the machines came, it was about scaling up the human muscle power, if you will. These technologies are scaling up the human brain power, because we're in the knowledge economy. So, and that's what excites me, is how to create the innovation and the technologies that can serve different sub-areas in healthcare and life sciences, and bring that power of cognitive technologies to understand data, understand knowledge sources, derive insights, and bring it to the point of care, and creating, either coming up with that next drug or solving a problem for that cancer patients, and at the end of the day, making an impact in the people's lives and giving hope to them.
So staying on big data, which each one of you has talked about, and we talk about a lot in healthcare, number one, how are you, both of you, using it in your organizations, and when will we see the impact, right? When will we really see the fruits of that labor in terms of better patient outcomes or better care delivery?
You already are. You just don't know.
Okay. Well.
I mean, just as an example, and I forget exactly the size of our preclinical database. You would probably be able to pronounce these very long words of, I don't know, zillion, billion bytes, or whatever they call them. But we were using that data fairly routinely to design new drugs, to predict doses of medicines before they went in the clinic. We used big data to analyze entire processes in drug development to sort out what was not obvious to us, the stupid things that we were doing that were driving waste. And we were experimenting, as I left, with using data when it came to marketing to patients, through social media. So those are just a few of the examples where it's routinely being used. Mm-hmm. It's just not always obvious in terms of the end product, how you got to the end product.
Okay.
In our case, actually, we are seeing the impact in certain areas. I don't know if you saw the CBS 60 Minutes, Charlie Rose, I think it was 3 months ago or so in January or February. And that segment started with our work on genomics. And this is actually cited the work done with UNC Chapel Hill, the cancer center there. And so we have a product, we call it Watson for Genomics. And it's interesting. So you give the tumor, the genetic makeup of the tumor, the variant file, to this machine. And basically what it does is, imagine the machine is sitting at the tumor board when they're discussing the patient and the options for the patient and so on. And no doctor, at least the ones that I have encountered, cannot read more than 400 papers, scientific publications per year. This thing reads hundreds of thousands of publications under a minute and understands it. Is not keyword search, is natural language processing applied to it. And it brings up suggestions of medication or trials that could actually help or map to the tumor makeup, the genetic makeup of this tumor. So the study done at UNC Chapel Hill on 1,000 patients, 99% of the cases, machine suggested the same therapy for that patient, where the doctors also had that same opinion. But what is interesting, 30% it suggested options where the doctors had missed. So that is hope for that end patient, right? So that is one example, but there are other examples of that from drug discovery, so in immuno-oncology, the work that we are doing, or ALS, all the way to radiology, helping that radiologist who is sitting in a dark room and going through files of images, highlighting where are the areas that they should look at and what is the most important by sifting through all this data of image and text and everything else about that person.
That's very exciting. Rachel, are you?
Yeah, I mean, and I do think, to David's point, there's countless examples of, where the industry has been leveraging data through the course of time, right? So these are some examples. I mean, in clinical research organizations, we look at data. One of the other big challenges is patients, right? Recruitment for trials. Right? So, the faster that you recruit patients for trials, the faster that you can move through all the different phases and then actually get the drug out to market. So, but that beginning part and actually finding the right patient for the drug, for that therapy, is very challenging. And in today's world, you would think it wouldn't be so challenging, right? There's a million ways for us to hit patients, but, that data is all private. It's very difficult still to find that. So now in our industry, there are many different data sets that we're now looking through, unstructured and structured data, where patients have consented, and we are now using that data to start to target patients so that we can talk to them directly to say, hey, this looks like a match for you. Are you interested in it? Rather than some of the old tactics that we've had in the past. And we anticipate that the more and more that, and to your point about millennials, the more and more people consent into these databases, which millennials tend to, that's where we're seeing people consent more than other generations. The easier it's going to be to recruit patients for the trials and then get drugs out to market. And what that means is that some of the trends that you're seeing around pricing for pharma, the cost for drug development has increased astronomically, right? So I have some numbers in front of me. It would cost $180 million in the 1970s to develop a drug. It now costs $2.6 billion, right? So we have to get that number down. And how do we do that? We need to leverage the data that's out there and be able to parse through that data, pull patients in sooner, get through the trials in a more efficient way. There's a lot of different leverage points within a trial. That's all going to help us get that number down, and then we should see the result in pricing, right? Because not only does it cost $2.6 billion, but biopharma margins, they've decreased from 26% to 18%, right? So you've all been through business school, the impact on these companies for that.
All right, well, you brought it up. So you brought up drug pricing, which is good because that is the elephant in the room, right? Everybody's talking about. So, yes, and David was saying.
I work for pharma, it's all his fault.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to help pharma.
Yeah. The reality is that pharma delivers a huge amount of value to patients and physicians and the system. So, but also gets quite a lot of negative press around some of the bad actors in the industry. So what can pharma do to convey its real value? Because honestly, talking about that and I hear it over and over, that it costs $3 billion to develop a drug, and that's not going to make people like you anymore. How can we do a better job?
I'm happy to talk about it. And since I don't work for a big pharma company, I can be very open. I don't have to worry about what I say. I think in general in this country, people are just pissed, right? It's hard enough to get a diagnosis, get the right treatment. The last thing you want to do is go to the pharmacy, have this enormous copay, and not be able to then take your medicine, or have to take your drug every other day, or cut the tablet, or do whatever you need to do to get the medicine. That's certainly one part of the story. The other part of the story that Americans don't see is that recently, for many very important breakthrough medicines that have been launched, adoption of those medicines has been much quicker in Europe than in the United States. And in fact, I had two examples where it was 5x faster in Europe than in the U.S. And it's driven largely by the interventions put in place by the PBMs, called prior authorizations. and very high copays that are prohibiting patients from actually filling their prescriptions. So we have actually two things that are broken. Pricing's too high, and certainly relative to the rest of the world, it's obvious. Although what you see in terms of a price in the newspaper usually doesn't reflect reality because discounts range from 30 to 50%, but they're still too high. And copays are completely out of control because the system is just broken if the patient can't get what his or her doctor prescribes. So both need to be adjusted. I sat on a panel. I was at the Alexandria Center here in New York near the United Nations. It's a place where they've created a place where many biotech companies have.
It's really, really nice.
Set up shop.
You should go.
It is really nice. You should go. I agree. But they do panels once a month. They talk about various topics, and I was called in to talk about cancer drug pricing because they thought I'd be controversial, and they said, please be controversial. So I decided to do that. Sitting to my left was a very high-level person at CVS Caremark, and he was, of course, blaming the drug industry for high prices and talked about the fact that they're so much higher in the U.S. than Europe, and that's the real problem. I brought up the subject of copays, which he dismissed as being relevant. And I said, with the audience, and there was probably about twice as many people as we have in this room, I said, let's do a thought experiment together. Would you do that? He said, of course. I said, imagine if it was legal, and I don't know that it is, but if the entire drug industry would agree to cut all their prices by 10%, would you reduce the copays? And he said, no. I said, imagine then, I said, I'm not surprised you said that. Imagine if it was legal and the entire industry could cut their prices by 20%. Would you eliminate your copays? He said, no, I can do better than that in terms of discounts. I said, what if it was 30%? And he said, no. And then the entire audience just broke out laughing because the reality is those people, the PBMs in the middle, are not incentivized by necessarily just getting the lowest price, but getting the biggest discount between the list price and the net, and keeping patients from taking drugs where they're not making money. And that's the reality of the broken system we have today, which unfortunately, despite your political affiliation, all the stuff we're talking about, the healthcare law and ACA and everything else, doesn't actually address the root cause problems, which is that issue, tort reform, and a few other things that need to be resolved in the United States. So I agree with you, pricing's too high, but just bringing down pricing doesn't solve anything.
Right. The other thing is communicating, right, to the public what the drugs do, but maybe that's a different. Okay, you are chomping at the bit. And can you say your name and what year you are and what you do?
Yeah, my name is Remedii. I just graduated last May, and I invest in startups. I wanted to ask.
So do I.
I wanted to ask about the price increase from 180 to 2 billion. The price increase to something billion.
Cost increases.
How much of that price increase is actually on the R&D side, so the development of the drug? From my understanding, a lot of, let's say, virtual trials done through simulations and stuff is actually bringing down the cost of the blind, vetting, especially on the genetic side. And how much of the price increase is actually on the distribution model of the pharmaceuticals in terms of paying,
So I'm just to make sure I understand the question. Are you asking, so Rachel spoke about the cost increase of developing a drug. Is that the question? Or are you asking about the price increases that the industry takes every year?
No, the price increase of the drug that you pay at the end.
Yes.
The end consumer's price increase.
Yep.
How much of that is on the development side and how much of that is on?
Neither. So industries, regardless of the industry, industries try to do two things. They try to grow their top line, and they try to improve their margin so that more profits flow to the bottom line, and that gets paid out as dividends, reinvested, share buybacks. We can talk about that a whole other day, et cetera. The industry has very little growth right now, which is interesting. You hear these huge price increases, and the industry is not really growing. So that tells you that there's two different stories here that don't connect. So the industry is not growing because of actually price pressures. And as a result, the net price increases to the pharma industry in the U.S. are between 0 and 2% a year. There's basically no price. There's almost no price change in the U.S. The list prices are going up 9 or 10% a year. So you might say, how does that happen? It's because those very same PBMs that I talked to you about want the prices to go up so they have a higher margin. And up until about a year ago, if you looked at the share price evolution of the major PBMs, you see they were the best performing group of companies in the entire healthcare industry because they're able to extract this profit margin.
So, yep.
Yeah, so PBM is a pharmacy benefit manager. So they're either part of an insurance company or work in between the insurance company and the payer and the employer who might be buying the services in order to bring down the cost of care by essentially negotiating drug prices and other services. And I got to tell you, this is an industry that for its first decade of existence did wonderful things. Yeah. Because what they did is they moved the U.S. from a branded, a name brand business where 80% of the prescriptions were branded to a place where only 20% are branded and 80% are generic. And generics are typically much lower cost. And they unlocked an enormous amount of value for the healthcare system. The problem is they don't have that opportunity anymore. And they're looking for other ways to make it happen, and they're trying to find their place. If there was a PBM person on this panel and they heard me say this, they would strangle me before I exited the room. But it's the reality of what I saw every day in my life. And then,
so
I have a question.
Well, can I just, examples of PBMs, Express Scripts, CVS, Caremark, those are PBMs. Go ahead.
So I was just going to ask. You answered. I was going to ask if people could name the PBMs, because I find it interesting that in every conversation I have, people don't know. Like everybody could name pharmaceutical companies, but people don't understand the middle part.
And I think the other point, and Bunny, you mentioned, just be very brief, but in addition, on the pricing side, there have been some call them egregious price increases, particularly among a collection of older drugs. Not only, but 400%, 4,000%, 15,000% increases. I can say safely I never did anything like that. You may not like what price increases I took, but they were never even 1% of those kinds of numbers. And unfortunately, that's what makes the headlines. That's what people say, and people suffer. People have serious diseases, and they can't get their medicines because of what's happened, and that's just unacceptable.
Yeah.
PBMs also impose a huge cost on the healthcare providers, which is completely unaccounted for. So that also is part of the value chain or lack thereof.
That's fair.
The doctor has to spend 15 minutes on the phone with OptumRx or Express Scripts trying to get the medication covered for his or her patient.
Yeah. It's not unusual today that if a new drug is approved, doesn't matter if it's life-saving, breakthrough, that the PBMs will put in place what they call prior authorization. And that prior authorization can be anywhere from one page to a document deck that's 30 to 40 pages long, depending upon how difficult they want to make it. And you can imagine if you're a physician and you have limited amount of staff, how much time are you going to put into working through that process?
So just to change topics a little bit, historically, healthcare has been very provider or institution-centric. But over the past few years, I think we in the industry have really begun to at least talk about the patient and the consumer experience and the millennials who are going to change it. And so there's a lot of talk about patient experience. I'm just curious what, if anything, your organizations are doing to address that and engaging the patient more effectively in their care.
So this issue of consumerism and consumer-oriented health is becoming a big issue. Mm-hmm. If you look at the VCs, there is a lot of money being spent and invested in this area. And there are so many apps and services that are mushrooming these days. I mean, last count, there were, I think, between Apple App Store and Android App Store, 220,000 apps for health and wellness and so on. Mm-hmm. However, I think it's not there yet, and there's going to be a lot of change in this space because a lot of consolidation will happen. A lot of these small startups will die out and so on, because a lot of them are not addressing the real challenges in health, and they're all operating in their own silos, if you will, right? So you have your diabetes management service here or app here, you have your asthma here, you have your benefit there, and so on, and none of them are talking to each other. A lot of the activity in this space is actually driven by the payers and employers as another sort of payer. And in order to create that engagement, in order to keep the costs down, so they can nudge you, they can provide the information, they can say, hey, you have to go to your doctor now to avoid a certain cost down the road and so on. But the true consumer-oriented health doesn't exist today, right? And one of the biggest issues that, there are several issues with that need to be sorted out before we have a true consumer-oriented health is, one is all of these services and apps around the consumer the consumer needs to be able to find them, first of all. What matters to them at any point in time, based on their condition, based on their patterns of behavior, based on their even social interactions and so on and so forth. The other thing is the longitudinal data that can feed into this doesn't exist. I mean, that is one of the major issues in health today. Although a lot of money has been put into that subject, but you don't have your digital health wallet, if you will. If you go from Dr. A to Dr. B to your employer, there is no transparency, there is no transition and sharing of that data. And the other thing, which in healthcare we haven't looked into much, is the issue of behavior change. And unfortunately, people haven't looked at this a lot, but I think it's time to bring, since we're in business school, behavioral economics type of thinking into healthcare and how health is being consumed, and bring that carrot and stick, if you will. And the other thing is how to leverage the digital touch points and physical touch points. So on average, everyone looks at their phone 80 times per day. How can you monetize? How can you leverage those 80 times in order to nudge this person, provide the information at the right time, and provide a service to them? I think we're not there yet. A lot of people are experimenting. As employers or as payers, people are doing consumer engagement, but I think that we are not seeing the full potential of this being realized.
Any other?
There's a lot of experimentation going on with what I would call is more comprehensive support, digital support, and a little was just spoken about, but it goes beyond just the app. You can imagine, and these things exist now. When I was leaving my company, we were using it already in our clinical trials. You can start to monitor patients remotely. For example, you can measure blood pressure, oxygen levels. It's probably going to be possible very soon to measure FEV, which is your ability to inhale or exhale air. And to the extent that that data can be collected from a patient, it can be fed into an algorithm, and then you could get the physician or some other healthcare provider or family member, frankly, could get early clues that a patient is decompensating or deteriorating and that they need to go back to the doctor for an intervention. And going back to the doctor doesn't even necessarily mean going into the doctor's office, but it might be a telemedicine or a video conference through Skype or some other mechanism, which would reduce the burden on the patient, get quicker interactions, bring down the costs for everybody. And I think it's clearly all going there. It's how do you bring it all together?
Yeah, I mean that's exactly what we're looking at at Inventive with various different sponsors. And I think you brought up virtual trials, and the industry is pushing as hard as this industry can to get there, right? To increase the numbers there, but it starts with it's starting with these experiments with wearables and how do we bring that data in, and remote monitoring. We're looking deeply into just centralizing our monitoring so that we can start to take advantage of more of these technologies rather than having to go out and pay a visit to actually see what's going on at all these various investigator sites. Just making the whole continuum less physically heavy, and much more focused on making it easier for the patient during the trial. And then of course there's still the after, right, when patients are actually, so the late stage trials when patients are actually on drug, it's out in the market, and how do we make sure that there's adherence, right? So there's tons of technologies already in this space, right? My company owns a few technologies in this space where we're trying to help with patient adherence. The industry spends a lot of money to get that patient on the first script, and then they kind of walk away, and it's just like everything else. And we lose patients, and here there's lives at stake when we lose patients, when they stop taking their drugs.
That's where behavioral economics comes in, because we've been trying to crack that nut for a long time and haven't succeeded. Sir, and what's your name, year? the whole thing.
I'm Joe Levingston, and I have an investment in Johnson & Johnson. My question is that there are statistics somewhere between 17 and 20% of the gross national product that goes to health care. What percentage of that roughly goes to treating patients as compared to everything else, whether it's research and development, whether it's insurance company profits?
Good question. So I know the rough number for drugs.
I know.
You know. Go ahead. Perfect.
There's a great pie chart that comes out every year that goes through exactly this. And the reality is pharma is not even 15% of the entire spend right now. It may escalate maybe to 18 or 20, but the biggest portion goes to care delivery. It's like 55% between the hospital or the institution and physician services. It may actually be a little more than 55%. And if you're interested in the chart, I'll give you my email. Were there any other questions? Yeah.
My name is Kedar. I am in EE Health, and I'm in the space where we are doing income capabilities into the value. So I want to touch on 3 points: the value-based care, and then Shahram talked about most of the activities driven by the payers and employers. And we also talked about conservatism. There's a lot of financial incentive. There's the activity that payers and employers are going to drive this activity here. What incentive they have so that they don't want to upset their financial model to come into a stage where it's a marketplace where consumers drive the prices, consumers drive the value that they get out of the services. What would be the challenges here? And why do you think that transition?
I'm sorry, just to understand, what is the incentive on the employer side to move into a marketplace? Yeah. So on the value-based care, so of course there is a lot of talk about value and outcome, and of course definition of value, that's a different story. But there are lots of experiments, and more than experiments, there are lots of real work going on between payers and providers, payers and pharmaceutical companies, payers and med device companies, and so on and so forth. And even pharmaceutical companies in Europe are contracting based on outcome and value, and actually in some instances they had to reimburse a European country because the particular drug didn't deliver the promised results. So a lot of companies are actually moving towards that space that I have encountered and I've talked to. And there is a good reason for that, because as healthcare is fee-for-service and transactional, and there's this discussion of ACOs and a lot of the outcome-based thing that is happening is moving away from that transactional-based fee-for-service to a more holistic, outcome-driven. Pharmaceutical companies are also doing the same thing, or medical devices, not just the pill plus, what services you surround the pill or that device so that you deliver the outcome and you own the engagement with that end consumer, right? I think Rachel also alluded to it. So that's very important. And I see one of your questions is all the environment of policy and politics that's going on. That's not going to change. A lot of people are already moving in that direction. If you look at the employers, I think 150 million lives are under the large self-insured employers coverage in this country, right? So us and our families and so on and so forth. So they have a big stake at this problem. Recently, there is an alliance actually formed called HTA, Health Transformation Alliance, which a number of large Fortune 500 companies have come together to see how to really do this employer-based health in order to reduce. And why they want to do it is it hits the bottom line of the companies. The care absenteeism and presenteeism. If you're sick and you don't go to work, or you're sick, you go to work, you don't do your job properly, all of that hits the bottom line of the companies and the productivity of the company. So they have a big thing at stake here to reduce that cost. So all of these large self-insured employers You pick any sample, they have a lot of health and wellness programs, and the way they contract with the payers who administer these kind of programs is what kind of wellness they want to do. And a lot of the consumerism is also driven by them through data acquisition using Apple Watches and Fitbits and those kind of, or home monitoring type of scenarios to basically nudges and providing information and benefits and those kind of things.
Any other? Yeah, sir.
Nick Dixon from 1997. I'm always staggered by, compared to Europe, this level of GDP spent on healthcare in the US. I think we've had 18 to 20%. In France, it's 13, 14. I think in the UK, we're about 9 or 10%, which is probably too low. But the healthcare outcomes here appear to be inferior compared to Europe. There's lower life expectancy. So how do you reconcile all of that? What is the fundamental problem with American healthcare in terms of cost and outcome?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Actually, I highly recommend looking at the last report coming out of National Academy of Medicine, the US. I was in the meeting 3 weeks ago when they talked about this report at National Academies. And it's very interesting. Yes, the healthcare spend in the US compared to European countries is very high. But if you look at the complete picture, the European countries spend a lot more on social care.
Yeah.
If you add the two together, probably...
Institute of Medicine or the Academy of Medicine?
National Academy of Medicine is the new name for Institute of Medicine. So it's the same thing. But so if you go to Europe, they have huge social programs, right? And that is very important because, again, there was a study, I think, published in Health Affairs in 2014 on determinants of health. 10% of determinants of health are your clinical factors. So when you go to your doctor or hospital and everything that's been captured of you. 30% is omics, genomics, and omics of different kind. More than 60% are I call exogenous, but behavioral, social, environmental, and other types of factors. Right? European countries are very good at addressing those factors because healthcare doesn't stop at the doors of the hospital. You get discharged, so let's say someone has heart failure, they go through all the surgeries and hospitalization, they get discharged, they go home. There are lots of studies. Your social support is a big determinant of you're going to end up in the hospital again or not, right? Because in the U.S. we don't have that element, therefore the cost of health is really high. Yeah. A very good example of it is in Camden, New Jersey, and the work that was done there. So it was actually a famous piece in PBS and New Yorker magazine reported on it. I forgot the name of the doctor. But basically what they did is they looked at people are going to ER every day at increasing rates. They put together teams of social workers, nurses, policemen, and so on. And so they dispatched them to troubled apartments and houses to find these people, give them maybe it's giving air condition to someone to avoid them basically go to the hospital. That's, I think, the main difference.
Yep. So, and another example, like in New York, it's a big topic. It's called social determinants of health, and you'll hear if you'll hear about it or a lot more. Montefiore, which is a hospital in the Bronx, very, very probably one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city, and one of the worst health outcome or for health status, not outcomes. And Montefiore is largely a Medicaid hospital, so they've really had to figure out how to manage that population. So, you know what? They look at their patients. Some of them don't have any housing, and so putting money towards getting them an apartment is a lot more effective than getting them into to see the doctor. Getting them into a building where the elevator actually works. And so an asthmatic patient can get outside, or somebody in a wheelchair can get outside, is a lot more important. So just to build on your point, it's absolutely...
That's well said. There's actually, to use another country's example, so in Japan, as you know, they have among the oldest population in the world. And the government's actually been reasonably forward-thinking. They are visiting these individuals. They're going into their homes. They're putting up bars. They're making the houses safe so they don't fall. these small investments actually pay back big time. Just to add to your point, so if you look at costs in the U.S., forget about what might be social benefit, health care, whatever. Whether it's the hospital stay, the doctor fee, or the drug price, all of them are higher in the U.S. You can argue whether that's right or wrong, but it's reality. I would also not say that health care across Europe is necessarily better. I think it is highly variable. And it's variable both by country and by disease. So, for example, in Britain, they're pretty good at preventative care, and they're really good at hospice care. In the middle, I would not want to get sick there, personally. And then there's other countries that are better at other things. If you have breast cancer, you want to get treated in the United States. So it really matters quite a lot what disease you're talking about.
How much of what's going on in healthcare do you think has to do with a misunderstanding by people of who's in charge? And what I mean by that is, what I've observed is I think people grew up thinking the doctor's in charge. Mm-hmm. And the changes with the insurance company and cutting the time the doctors can spend and pushing the responsibility back to the patients, it's almost like the doctors act like the patient's in charge. But the patients don't know. And it's like the ball has dropped between them and it's sitting on the floor. And no one's picked up the ball. Can you comment on that, and if that rings true to any of you, or if you think that's off?
I like the description with the ball sitting between. I think that's a good way to make it, to see it. And you're right. I don't know if that's exactly right, but it is clear that patients still expect their physicians to know all and help them, but yet the physician's not always in control because there's a lot of other forces impacting on that physician. And patients, while they, over time, have gotten more involved in their care, and the internet has certainly sometimes helped and sometimes not helped, they're often not really prepared to understand. I have a father that's 80 years old. He has multiple concomitant indications, and I just listen to the stuff he tells me. Or when he comes back from his doctor, what he thought he heard. It's really a mess. And there are multiple times when I've intervened that I've saved him serious problems. Not because anyone did anything wrong. It's just that he's not qualified to put it all together and understand. So I don't know what the solution is. Now, the idea in managed care was you would have a primary care physician that would somehow make all that work. I'm not quite sure it's played out that way.
It didn't. Yeah. To the point about your dad, you knew what to do, yep. Right? And so I love your question because you're absolutely right. The whole payment scheme, frankly, and the change and all of the burdens placed on doctors really has led to a lot of, I just don't want to do this anymore. There's the status of being a doctor is lower now, certainly the compensation. It's not bad, believe me, it's not bad. But, I still would be a urologist, but, but it's the primary care physician, really, who you need to connect with. And those people make a lot less than an MBA graduating from Columbia. Well, right, and they don't have time because it's the payment scheme that is making that. And so you're right. There is this big gap. On the positive side, there are many more consumers who care. We have access to information readily available. You can argue all day long it's bad information or it's crappy information. But you know what? There's actually a lot of good information that you can access as well. So patients are going to have to take more control of their care.
They need to recognize that the ball is
Yeah, no, you're right. There has to be,
just to build on that, right, not as a professional working for Inventive Health, but as a person, right, living every day like you guys, right. I had a dear friend who passed away a couple years ago from cancer, but when he was diagnosed, and we were in the pharmacy, we were both working in a biotech. When he was diagnosed, we knew enough, right? So he and I went out and scoured what was available, right? And I was his advocate, and we got him into the right trials. It was too late, but we knew what we needed to do, right? And we knew that if we didn't do it, it wasn't going to just suddenly appear on his plate for him to join, a trial. When he got declined from the first trial, we understood why, and then we knew what to do to look for the next trial. So I think you're right. I think it's very much in our hands a lot, unfortunately or fortunately.
You?
I work actually in diagnostic imaging, so on the drugs. And in USA, I must say, my industry makes many more procedures than what happens to the population. I mean, and my point is, my observation, and of course, I make money out of that. There is a paradox here. My observation has been that probably in USA, there are three main drivers to these ratios. One is lifestyle and population, with 30% of the population which is obese. And I remember there was a study from McKinsey which said that every body mass index point costs $300 per body mass index above the normality. These are major, and I'm surprised that nobody ever speaks about that.
They do. People do talk about the obesity problem. They're just not doing anything. They do talk about the obesity. I mean, and how
lifestyle can dramatically probably change.
Yeah.
And you can drop this money in education. I'm only surprised about that. Second point is an industry driven on all levels by profit. So doctors don't have an incentive to suggest, for instance, that for anosmia, the lack of you can buy salty water in your nose and clean it up. So before going to an operation which takes you home for 1 week, I have this personal experience. After one CT, one MRI scan, 5 specialist visits, so a massive cost to end up with salty water. Also profit. And then that is surgical, as you mentioned. I mean, if, and my industry is one of the main users, if you do if you don't want to do your job, you know that you will end up to cover this 2% of risk making a CT scan. And then you cover your job. So I think, what do you think about this? For me, are the three.
Yep. You're absolutely correct.
Come on!
No, seriously. So obesity is a key driver of, I mean, frankly, morbidity and cost, right? So, and it's not just a U.S. problem, although the U.S. seems to have led the trend, but you're starting to see it all around the world now, unfortunately. It's pretty clear that when it comes to essentially, pay for a transaction, there's incentives to have scans done. And the fear of being sued for not doing whatever is considered the standard of care will drive some decision making. That's absolutely true as well. So I actually cannot disagree with you. Now the question is what to do about all that, right? Getting tort reform through the U.S. Congress is not an easy undertaking. In fact, I would argue it may be completely impossible.
Is this on? Yeah. I'm Vic Cioni. I'm class of 92, and I'm a CEO of a specialty pharma startup.
Oh.
And I want to go back to your earlier comment about millennials, and I was intrigued by that because millennials are typically not big users of the healthcare system. So the fact that you think change is going to be driven by the millennials and they're really reacting to the current system, I just want to hear some more color. What are you seeing? What led you to that comment?
Well, I was quoting the CEO of the Urgent Care Center, and they do see quite a few millennials because the hospital system is broken who wants to go to an ER? Nobody. So, hence the rise of, what? What? Oh, no. Yeah, I know they go, but who in this room really wants to go to an ER and wait, right? Can I finish? Great. So in his business, he's seeing a lot of complete, dissatisfaction from that community, and that's what's been driving him and their business to innovate. And looking at all of the other industries. One of the questions I was going to ask is real disruption to healthcare going to come from within the industry or from outside the industry? Because many people talk about that as a possibility as well, like from a Google or Facebook. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So there's lots of different forms of disruption, and some of them give me great hope. So I'll talk about something that's positive,
Good.
And then I'll let someone talk about the healthcare system more generally. As I said when I was introducing myself, I've been absolutely, in a positive way, surprised about the technological advances that are being made. Both in understanding human genetics of different diseases, and the ability to now use other, what I would call, technology platforms to drive health improvement. I'll just give you an example or two. I just joined the board of a company called Evelo. It's a private company. They've screened the gut bacteria of literally tens of thousands of people, healthy and sick people. And they did this because there's lots of animal data now showing that if you change the gut flora, you can address diseases like Parkinson's disease, depression, you can treat cancer. They've even done retrospective analysis that people that are on immuno-oncology drugs, those with certain gut flora respond and others don't. So there's a growing body of evidence. After they screened all this bacteria and they ran it through what would be classical industry assays or tests, for those who are not in the industry or the lingo, they find particular strains of bacteria that have clear and compelling anti-inflammatory properties, clear and compelling anti-tumor properties. And when you think about the fact that the bacteria we all carry and our immune system have co-evolved for as long as man has been on the planet, however long you might believe that is, it kind of makes sense. And this is an area that has been totally overlooked over time. So this will be a whole new approach to treating patients. Likewise, we've seen now the manipulation of white cells or T cells to treat certain cancers. I did a licensing deal when I was at Novartis with University of Pennsylvania. We acquired their T cell therapy technology. And there have been now filings in the U.S. from Novartis for the treatment of pediatric ALL and from another company called Kite for the treatment of diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, essentially taking a person's white cells, modifying them genetically, and giving them back and turning them into anti-tumor agents. We have examples of children who went through 5 lines of therapy, had literally weeks to live, and who have been alive 4 or 5 years now. So that's yet another example. I'm currently chairing a company that has licenses of technology where we can take a stem cell, so a precursor cell that we all carry, and turn it into a fully functional red blood cell. And you might say, who cares about that? Who wants to get their blood replaced? You don't want to get your blood replaced. But what that means is during that growth process, you can change the blood and give it super properties. You can express any protein you want on that red cell or in that red cell, and you can now treat cancer, autoimmune disease, induce tolerance, maybe treat diabetes. These are all breakthrough technologies that are going to be in the hands of physicians and actually in the not very distant future. So that's what gets me excited. So that's the disruption that will come through technology. Now there's lots of disruption that can come from how services are provided and IT technology and the like.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I mean, at the scientific level and discovery, absolutely. I mean, David talked about that. From technology point of view, I think all this, now that we can sense people better, being their genetics or imaging or at home monitoring them or everything else, and make sense of that, and basically have these machines that can read millions of pages of publications or sift through people's data to suggest to someone what is best for this patient or what could work. That is great. And the issue of what you asked is this consumer enablement through the technology, through these mobile devices. That is also happening. I think on the flip side of that is the inertia in the system, if you will. It's that, again, I go back to the topic of behavior change. One of the biggest, I think the drug for 21st century is consumer engagement and behavior change. If someone can crack the code, and it's not just the consumer, is also behavior change on the side of the people who deliver care and how they can adopt this. I think there's the issue of in the system that needs to be modified, and there are good experiments going on with that, but we're not there yet.
So I think we have time for 2 more questions.
Yeah, my name is Bill Patrick. I'm a class of '92. And one of my part-time jobs is I'm a pharma professor at Rutgers Business School, where I got my undergraduate. And my question is sort of how to set a price for drugs, most commonly that help or stop the progression of cancer, when the pharmacoeconomic value model just doesn't add up. What are we going to do when we've got a drug that definitely saves 2 years of someone's life? How are we going to set a dollar amount, and how are we as an organized society going to decide what it's worth? We need money for education. We need money for defense. We need money for roads. I'd really be interested in your thoughts about that.
Yeah, so, different countries have taken different approaches. The U.S. system has been charge what you can and see what happens. for the most part. I'm trying to be as blunt as I can. The European systems vary, but in the case of the UK, to use one example, they have a system of quality-adjusted life years, and then they try to add something extra for cancer patients, recognizing that cancer patients, particularly elderly ones, are not contributing a lot to society, so they try to essentially goose the model a little bit to provide a little bit extra. You know, as an American, one might argue that the free markets will eventually, and eventually is the operative word here, take care of the issue because there'll be competition and prices will come down. I just mentioned the T-cell therapies for you. We're going to find out at the end of the year what Kite and Novartis charges to give someone their life back. I suspect it's going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, is that the right number or not? I don't see the government picking the number. I am not opposed, I'm not opposed to the government negotiating price, but I don't think they should necessarily just pick the number.
Just follow up on your Rabi Khoury class of 97. I'm actually in venture capital, so intellectual property protection is very important. However, it creates also ethical questions. Just following up on the gentleman's, if you weaken intellectual property rights, or for example the length until which a medicine can become a generic, do you think we'll have an issue of creativity and improvement in drugs, even though there are ethical questions and some countries have already decided to violate IP protection for
I mean, IP is everything in this industry, right? So this is a risky business. We just heard about how much it costs to develop a drug. There has to be capital available. People won't put their capital in unless they can get a return that offsets the risk. Yeah, no, that's what I'm just talking to the entire audience here. Clearly, if society was to wipe out all of IP or take it to a very small number, the prices would come down pretty quickly. But that would be pretty much the end of innovation. Now, whether or not the right number of years should be 12 or 17 or 10 or 21 or some other number, I don't know. I happen to think in Europe they have a pretty good system. Basically, every drug gets this 8 + 2 and maybe one more year for the most part. It works pretty good. It seems to provide an adequate return for the industry. If you look at today's biggest drugs, I think if I remember the stats right, and the professor or almost professor will correct me, I think 9 of the top 10 drugs are biologics. Most of those drugs either have no patent any longer or are about to lose the patent, and you can bring them to the biosimilars or what they call follow-on biologics to market in Europe pretty easily, so the costs are coming down. The U.S., there is a very contorted process to make that happen, so very few have been approved and launched. A little bit of legislation would fix that and bring down costs in a big way, and that most of those drugs are cancer drugs, either cancer or they're used for autoimmune disease. Those are the 2 big categories.
Okay, we are at 5:15, so thank you all. Have a wonderful reunion. And thank you to the panelists.